Oh, hi there. My name is Leah, and this is Get Ready with Murder, a weekly, semi-weekly, when I get around to it, series on true crime and makeup. Basically, I'm going to tell you a true crime story while I try on some makeup. So if you want to see how I did this look and hear the story of the murder of Marjorie Nugent by Bernie Tiede, make sure to stay tuned. Let's get this party started. Today's Get Ready with Murder is the tale of Bernie Tiede. You may have heard of the film starring Jack Black called Bernie, which is, I would say, probably kind of loosely based on this story. But we're going to go on all the details and where that movie comes into play, because turns out it might be kind of a big part of the story. So let's get into it. So Bernie Tiede II was a first-generation American born to German and Ukrainian parents who moved to Texas from Europe. His father was a choir director and taught choir and vocal studies at a few colleges around Texas, and then they finally settled at one spot where he worked most of his life. Bernie's mother unfortunately died when he was 2 in a car accident. But his father did remarry when he was 5, so he really did, grow up with a typical mother, father, child type of family. And Bernie did actually end up losing his dad when he was 15, but he went on to graduate high school and became an assistant funeral director at a local funeral home. And while he was working there, he really got to be somebody who kind of went out of his way to befriend the widows and the grieving families, and was, very kind and made them feel as good as he could during their, time of grief. And he was always very well liked by the families of the clients at the funeral home that he worked for. In 1990, he met a very special friend in Marjorie Nugent. She was the wife of an oil man and banker, so she had lots of money. And she and Bernie became fast friends. They kind of clicked right away. They started spending a lot of time together. She was estranged from her family, so I think he kind of became like a surrogate son for her, somebody that she felt she could trust. This always looks so patchy. Within a few years of their friendship, hanging out, fancy parties, lots of great gifts, Bernie eventually left his job at the funeral home to become Marjorie's full-time assistant, travel companion, guy who takes care of the finances, all of that business. She didn't really have anybody else, so she chose Bernie. Now, what the backstory is on her kids and her, that I don't have much on. I tried to find some information as far as what happened there. I'm assuming the typical, when people come into money, family stuff, nothing ever goes well. Also during this time, Bernie became the sole inheritor of her estate, which I believe was about $10 million. So you can bet that ruffled a few feathers within the rest of the family, because just because they weren't talking to mom doesn't mean the money that their dad had worked for wasn't going to make their way to them. And then they found out it wasn't. Alright, so I picked up a few things on the Saucebox Black Friday sale, and I'm just going to use some of their single shadows. This is the shade Chocolate. So after about 3 years, after Bernie left his job and became, Marjorie's best friend, her family that she did still talk to started to get a little bit worried that they hadn't heard from her in a while. So her son, not being able to get a hold of her, even though they were estranged and didn't have a great relationship, did get worried and declared her a missing person with the local law enforcement. After that, he went to her home to just kind of, see if she was there, and just really just avoiding him or what was going on. And he found her body in a deep freeze. So roughly 9 months earlier, Marjorie had been shot in the back with a .22 caliber rifle, wrapped in a white sheet, put in the freezer, and the freezer was left in the garage. This is called Cinnababy. So because Bernie was the closest person to her at the time, the police, of course, brought him in for questioning, and he pretty much immediately confessed to her murder. He told the police that while he initially had really enjoyed Marjorie's company, liked hanging out with her, she started to become, and I quote, very hateful, possessive over my life, evil and wicked. He admitted to them that he even fantasized about hitting her over the head, and chose to go with shooting her because he didn't want her to suffer. In the time between him shooting her in the back, stuffing her in a freezer and sticking it in the garage, and her son finding his mother in that position, Bernie had no problem going out and doing some shopping. So during that 9 months, he ended up spending about $500,000 of her estate. Some of it did go to charitable organizations, but a lot of it went to goodies. He helped some friends who were in financial binds, but mostly looks like deposits were made basically to himself. So of course he was arrested, and as the case prepared to go to trial, it came out in the press just how well liked Bernie was around town. There was one point where the district attorney, this is a sloppy job by the way, asked to move the trial to somewhere else just because the people in town had like a really strange view of Bernie versus Marjorie. Marjorie was kind of a crotchety old lady. She wasn't real nice to people. Just that vibe. And then Bernie was, you know, the jovial funeral director who made everyone feel so nice at funerals and was just kind of happy-go-lucky all the time. So even though it was probably pretty clear that he killed Marjorie, the DA was really worried that they weren't going to find enough people that would actually convict him just based on how much they liked him. And this one is Kelp It Real. The trial actually did get moved to another town that was about 60 minutes away. He came in and testified that though he did love Marjorie very much, that's pretty, he felt like he was already living in prison, that she was smothering him. And he also testified that he did not ever actually plan on killing her, despite what he said in his confession, and that when he did shoot her, he felt like he was having an out-of-body experience, like he was, you know, had left his body and was just watching himself shoot her in the back. This is Pirate's Gold. However, that change of story didn't do anything for the jury at all. They took about 90 minutes to convict him. And even though they had moved the trial, as he was being escorted out of the courthouse, these shimmers are bonkers. There were still people outside yelling their support, you know, like, "We love you, Bernie, we're on your side," still, even after he was convicted. The jury sentenced Bernie to 50 years in prison, and then he went off to go serve his sentence, where he was a model prisoner, sang in the prison church choir, made cross stitches, and was just such a great guy in prison. And also during this time, Richard Linklater filmed a movie starring Jack Black and Shirley MacLaine that was basically the story of Bernie up until this point, showing Marjorie as a manipulative, you know, old mean woman, and Bernie this, you know, happy-go-lucky sweet guy that was being used and abused by this rich old lady. So while that was more than likely characterization by, you know, Hollywood to make for a good filmmaking, out of it something kind of interesting happened. A criminal attorney contacted some of the people who wrote the film and wanted to read the trial records, because she couldn't quite figure out why somebody who was, you know, seen so much by the entire community as such a great guy, why he would just one day snap. This lawyer, Jody Cole, asked Bernie if she could represent him, and he said yes. Through her investigation and conversations with Bernie, she found out that there was some evidence that was not reported during the trial. The main piece of that evidence being that he was molested as a child by an uncle. So she had Bernie talk with a psychologist, and the psychologist reported, and I quote, that Bernie's ability to repress and compartmentalize the abusive events of his childhood and adolescence was ultimately overwhelmed by the repeated and extensive psychological abuse he suffered from Ms. Nugent. He went on to state that after Ms. Nugent had made some particularly unpleasant comments about one of Bernie's friends, he completely lost control of his emotions, behavior, experienced a psychological dissociative experience in which he felt he was floating outside of his body when he shot her. So with this new evidence, Ms. Cole immediately filed for a retrial. The DA actually had the original psychologist interview Bernie based on this new evidence, and the original psychiatrist, mental health professional, agreed with the findings of the new one that he did have a dissociative moment. So the case went back to trial. And of course, none of this is like immediate. This isn't all within a couple of months. We're talking years here. So 16 years after he was originally sentenced, Bernie was released on bail and actually moved into an apartment behind the house of Richard Linklater, who was the guy behind the Bernie movie. Bernie was given a new sentencing trial. The judge threw out the previous sentence, and the new trial had 2 new district attorneys because the previous one basically believed that Bernie should not be behind bars anymore. The 2 new DAs from the state district, or I guess not DAs, but prosecutors from the state attorney's office agreed that there should be a new trial based on new evidence, and they took it to court. But their evidence did not agree with Bernie's story of having a dissociative moment. They believed he was a con man who was just in it for the money. Over the next few weeks of the trial, more than 80 people testified, which is a lot. I served jury duty for about 2.5 weeks, and it was nowhere near 80 people that took the stand. There were people that came forward to talk about his state of mind when he was with Marjorie, akin to an abused wife who couldn't leave an abusive relationship. Also, people talked about what he did during the time that he was out on bond, serving for nonprofits, being a volunteer, just kind of generally being a stand-up citizen. So at this point in the trial, people were, totally on his side. And also during this time, there was a couple of star-studded galas to help raise funds for his trial costs. Jack Black was there, sang some songs, razzle-dazzled, and Richard Linklater was like, yeah, he can babysit my kids. It's no problem. He's a great guy. But the prosecuting attorneys told a completely different story. They told the story that he was really kind of conning this sweet old lady just for her millions and millions of dollars. They had witnesses come up stating that people at previous funeral homes that he had worked at had asked for money back that he had borrowed from them, and one he actually just abruptly left when some money went missing from the funeral home. And then the financial investigator took the stand. The financial investigator stated that Bernie had spent about $3 million of her estate on himself, put into his accounts. He did things like invest in an aviation company. What else? And invested in a Western wear store in Town Square, but didn't invest all the money, but mostly kept it for himself. There seems to be some evidence that he had transfer funds offshore to like Swiss bank accounts. And there was also presentation of some deposit slips that he would have been presenting to Marjorie as that he was putting money into her account, but really he was transferring funds to his own. Shady business. Among other forged financial documents. At one point he was even described as a one-person Ponzi scheme, which, yikes, that's rough. But then on the other hand, Marjorie did say, here's all this money, it's yours now, do what you want with it. But was that because he pressured her into that, or did that actually happen? Was that also forged? I don't know. Just saying, could be a thing. Financial evidence aside, on the last day of trial, the prosecuting attorneys brought in a new psychiatrist, mental health professional. Being a complete third party with no tie to either side of the trial, he did conclude that Bernie's childhood sexual trauma had nothing to do with his acts in Marjorie's case. And after talking with Bernie, he stated that it did appear that Bernie had gotten over that abuse at some point, and that when he talked about his relationship with Marjorie, it did not resemble an abusive relationship, that there had been some tension, but it didn't appear to closely resemble a domestic violence relationship. He also did not think that it was a sudden snap and moment of passion in which he killed Marjorie, but a result of the cumulative intolerance of the widow. He also stated that Bernie exhibited signs of narcissism and antisocial behavior, which led him to believe that there was no reason to believe that he would not commit a crime like this again. During the trial, Bernie actually did not take the stand because his lawyer said that he was too fragile and in such a state of mental distress that he would not be able to take the stand and provide accurate answers. So he was not examined or cross-examined, and his lawyer asked the judge to sentence Bernie to either time served or only an additional 3 years, which would be a total of 20 years in prison. So after all of this back and forth in this crazy trial, the jury took 4 hours to deliberate, and they came back with a guilty verdict, and his sentence was changed to 99 years to life. After he was sentenced and sent back to jail, his lawyers of course appealed one more time, but the judge did uphold that sentencing, and to this day Bernie is in prison in Texas. So that is the story of the murder of Marjorie Nugent by Bernie Tiede. What do you guys think? Like, this is such a strange one. Like, yes, there's evidence like so strong for both ways. Like, do you think he was a con man who took her for her money? Or do you think he really was that just like nice, jovial guy that everyone in town likes for a good reason and just snapped one day and killed a lady who just happened to give him millions of dollars? I don't know. I don't know. All I know is money makes people do terrible things, and you need to be nice to people, otherwise they might shoot you in the back. Alright, so let me know your thoughts on this whole crazy thing down in the comments. Or do you have even a different awesome theory? I want to know that too. Alright, you guys, so that is it for me tonight. I thank you so much for joining me on this crazy adventure of the story of Bernie. If you liked the video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I hope you have a super great rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye, 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 bye.